So you probably know the new KC Cup is going to come pretty soon, and oh boy, it's not going to be fun because of this deck. Tachyon Dragon is a tier 0 deck right now, and understandably, because this deck is crazy. It's good going first, it's good going second, it can play through anything. And if you're thinking to yourself, wait, I could like counter this deck with a single Book of Moon, it's not that good, then that just means that you're not playing against a good Tachyon player. Because if you face against a good Tachyon player, they could play through pretty much anything when they're going second, and if they go first, they have ways to counter your counters, essentially. So let's have a look at the cards that actually are the biggest threats in the deck. First is obviously the counter trap. This card can be activated from your hand, so you cannot just pop it with an MST or something. And this deck also has access to IDP and Overroot for some reason. For some unknown reason, the skill just lets you summon anything as long as you meet the requirements of your deck building. It's not like other legacy skills like Constellars where it locks you into only special summoning Constellar monsters except from the extra deck. This deck allows you to basically summon anything. So yeah, IDP and Overroot are two pretty strong cards that the deck can play for some reason. And the main issue with this deck, the main threats in this deck all lie in the extra deck, aside from, you know, the counter trap. But the Tachyon Dragon itself, it doesn't really do a lot, but in combination with the counter trap, it is a really big threat, and also it has a lot of attack, so it's not that easy to just beat over it. And it's often accompanied with Felgrand. This card is insane. It doesn't only negate a monster effect, you usually can also use this effect on your own Tachyon, because you actually don't need Tachyon's effect, you just need the monster to be on your field to be able to activate the counter trap. So oftentimes what you will do is, if you face against a Tachyon player and you have something like a Book of Moon, and you think to yourself, okay, I'm just gonna book his Tachyon so he can't use his Omni Negate. Well, joke's on you, because he can just use Felgrand on his own Tachyon, and that Tachyon isn't affected by any effects, not just monsters, but also spells and traps as well. So not only does it stop your counters like Book of Moon or Dark Hole, it also stops any of your combo pieces, any of your monsters that you use in your combo to actually remove your opponent's Tachyon with any sort of card effect. You have to beat over it by battle, or use some kind of other very niche methods to get rid of it. The deck also plays Dragon Trainer. Coach King is a really good card going first if they are able to make 3 level 8s on field. It is just basically a super power of 3. It lets them draw 3 cards, and that helps them draw into strong traps like IDP a lot more easier. And going second, they have access to Full Armor Photon Dragon and Cyber Blade Dragon. These 2 cards are very good going second. They pop 2 cards in your opponent's field, one face up and one face up or face down, and it's just a really big threat that could easily clear your board. And also Cypher Blade Dragon has a floating effect that floats into the regular Cypher Dragon, but some people still don't play the regular Cypher Dragon because the regular one doesn't really do a whole lot. So yeah, another really big threat is actually the Chaos version of Tachyon Dragon, because this card, when you activate its effect, it negates everything on field. So if you think that your opponent can't out a really big untargetable boss like Leo Dancer or something, think again, because this card just negates everything. It negates without targeting, and also it prevents your opponent from activating any effects on field for the rest of the turn. So if your opponent doesn't have a way to get rid of this card, you just basically lock them out of everything, which is crazy, which means as soon as you make this card, your opponent is required to get rid of it as soon as it hits the field. And that forces out any kind of interruption on this card, so you can later make some of your other stuff like your Full Armor Photon Dragons. And lastly, we also have Dingyusu, because this deck can make Dingyusu. This card is also really good outside of Orcust because it is a rank 8 that can be easily made in this deck that basically allows you to send a card your opponent controls without targeting. And that is really good. It gets around target protection, it gets around destruction protection, it can send monsters, it can send back row. It basically forces your opponent to activate every single back row that they can activate if they cannot negate this effect, because if your opponent activates one back row and have another back row set, you can just send the other back row because it doesn't target. You only choose a target after the effect resolves. So yeah, and also it provides destruction protection for every single card on your field, which is insane. Yeah, so that's basically it for the threats of this deck. Let's have a look at the counters. So here are some counters that are good against this deck. Some are better than some others. Some are good going first. Some are good going second. But I just want to say that Tachyon is one of those decks that, if you play well, this deck is basically unstoppable. So if you face against a skilled Tachyon player, no matter how many disruptions you have, your opponent will probably still find a way to play through all of them. It's one of those all gas decks like Salamangreat that could play through anything if they open good enough. So if you think that you can stop your opponent with only one disruption, you either are playing against a really bad Tachyon player or they just bricked really hard. But anyway, here are some of the counters. And the first few that I want to talk about are the generic stuff like Book of Moon, Canadia, Floodgate, and also the free-to-play Horror House. These cards are better than the other counters against Tachyon because it flips the monster face down. And if you remove your opponent's monster with something like a Compulse or a Crackdown or even IDP, you're just making them more space to summon even more monsters because they can just summon like infinity monsters just on the field to make their rank 8. So it's better to have cards that flip their stuff face down to clog up their zones so that they can't have that many zones to special summon a lot of their level 8 monsters. So these cards do that. And especially Floodgate Trap Hole is really good against Nebula Dragon because that monster summons 2 monsters at the same time, and Floodgate Trap Hole will be able to flip down on both of them, which is pretty nice, and also it doesn't target. But the problem with these cards is that you need at least 2 of these to actually stop your opponent. Because if you only have 1, they still have 2 remaining zones that they can use to make their Xyz monsters. So you need to have at least 2 flips to clog up 2 of their main monster zones so that they only have 1 left so they can't make any of their rank 8s. And even then, if your opponent already knows what you're playing in a tournament or something, or if they specifically play around cards like these, they can reserve their normal summon until you activate 2 of these traps or spells, and then they can just tribute summon using the 2 face down monsters. But that requires your opponent to either play in a tournament and already know what deck you're playing, or just, I don't know, I don't know why would anyone just save their normal summon, but that is a really specific scenario, but usually having 2 flips is enough to stop this deck if you're going first. Next is, let's talk about Terrors of the Overworld. This card is basically the same as the other flip down traps like Floodgate, but it also sends a card from your opponent's side of the field to the graveyard and then grabs another card from the graveyard. It's slightly better than these other flip cards because it also removes one of the cards from your opponent's graveyard, and it also achieves the same purpose of having a face-down monster on your opponent's side to clog up one of the zones. And also I want to mention that flipping monsters face down is better than stuff like Warning Point, because Warning Point leaves that monster face up, and you can use the skill, your opponent can use the skill to return any face-up monster back to the hand to grab the counter trap or grab the rank up magic. So having that monster face down is a lot better than having it face up. And other turn 1 counters include my favorite, Mischief of the Gnomes. I've used this card in the tournament, and I've stolen a lot of wins using this card exactly. This card can be activated on the field to reduce all levels of your opponent, all levels in your opponent's hand by 1, and also you can also banish this card from the graveyard to use the same effect, essentially. And also this effect can be used during the turn it's sent. Unlike a lot of other traps that have graveyard effects, this card can be used immediately when it is sent to the graveyard, and also it's a quick effect, just like all traps when it's in the graveyard. This card itself is may not be as good as some of the other counters, but what makes this card good is that it is really accessible in a lot of decks, because any deck that could make Beatrice can have access to this card basically from anywhere, because you don't have to draw this card. You can just send this card to the graveyard with Beatrice and banish it from the graveyard to achieve the same effect. And this effect ends their turn, ends the Tachyon player's turn entirely, because once you activate this effect, they will not have a single level 8 monster in their hand. All of their monsters will be level 7, and that stops them from activating a lot of stuff. They can't use their skill, because that requires a level 8. They can't use Nebula Dragon, because that needs a level 8. They can't use Trade-In. And even if they summon a monster out on field, that monster still has their levels reduced. So even if they have a lot of extenders, they can still summon a bunch of stuff, but they will all be level 7. And they will also need the Galaxy Spiral Dragon to make them level 8 to even start playing. And another really good going first option is Stygian Dirge. This card is basically the same with Gnome, but it's continuous and stays on the field until your opponent gets rid of it. It's better in some cases, it's worse in some cases. This card is vulnerable to MST, so if your opponent opens with back row removal, this card just dies, but you can always chain the Mischief of the Gnomes in response to a back row removal and still have its effect active. And also it's a lot less accessible to than the Gnome, and also it only affects monsters on the field, so you can't stop your opponent from using the effect of Nebula Dragon, for example, because it's still level 8 in their hand. Some other non-level reducing effects that are good turn 1 are Summon Breaker. This card is actually really good against Tachyon if you go first, and most Tachyon decks don't play an out to this card. Because what this card does is that if both players summon or flip summon or special summon 3 times in their turn, it immediately ends the turn. So there is no way for Tachyons to actually play around this. In their usual combo, they need to draw the out in MST or some kind of back row removal, but I know most players don't even play back row removal, so this card just auto-wins against them if you open with this card going first. And imagine this scenario. If your opponent is against this card and they go second, what can they do? So if they make 2 level 8s and then make Xyz monster, that's the third summon and that ends their turn. So they can't even use Xyz monster's effect to pop this card. They need to make the Xyz monster first, and then that immediately triggers the effect of the field spell, which ends their turn. They couldn't even search the counter trap if they wanted to. So if they need, because if you grab the counter trap, you need to have 1 extra monster on field for you to bounce back, and that is 1 additional summon. So that count towards the limit, which prevents them from even making Tachyon Dragon if they choose to search the trap. And also, one thing to note is that flip summon does count for the field spell. So if your opponent uses their skill to set a monster face down and then flip them face up immediately, that counts as 1 summon, which will count towards the limit for this card and will end their turn as soon as they hit 3 summons. Another one is Summoning Curse. This card banishes a card from the controller's hand every time a monster is special summoned, including yourself. So what you will usually do is to activate this card during the end of your combo before you end your turn, and then just wait for your opponent to commit. Every single monster they summon will require them to banish a card from their hand. So you know the annoying thing that they usually do with Limit Dragon, they special summon it, bounce it back to the hand, special summon it again because it's not 1 per turn. So yeah, if they do that, they will have to banish a card from their hand every single time they special summon a monster, which is a really big cost because they special summon a lot. So this card is really good with that. And let's go over some cards that are good going second. Xyz Encore are good going first and second because this card is really good just against Xyz monsters in general and is a quick play spell. So even if you have it going first or second, you can still find a way to use it. And this card just straight up cannot be negated, so it just ignores the counter trap entirely. And also, it's slightly better going first because it also clogs up your opponent's zones. As soon as your opponent makes Xyz monster, you can activate this card, and then return that Xyz monster back to your extra deck, revive back 2 of its materials, and then reduce its level by 1, and just preventing them from using them as material again. So that clogs up your zones and forces them to end on nothing, basically. But even going second, you can use this to remove the Tachyon, so you can at least have one less thing to deal with. Another card that's good going first and second is a Super Poly. This card is actually really good against a typical Tachyon board that they put up. It's usually 1 Felgram plus 1 Tachyon Dragon, and they're both light monsters. They're both light, and one of them is a warrior, and one of them is a dragon. So that meets the requirements of a Mud Dragon. It's 2 monsters with the same attribute but different types. So you can just use this card to just get rid of both of them entirely, and then just give yourself a monster that you can use yourself. And Mud Dragon is a pretty good card because it prevents your opponent from targeting your own monsters as soon as that card hits the field, and also you can change its attribute to anything you want so that it matches the attribute of your deck, so it also protects your other monsters as well. But the main problem is that you need to play this card alongside the fusion target, which not a lot of decks can, and also some decks just couldn't make Mud Dragon because of the skill that unlocks them from playing other stuff or summoning monsters with a level. And also it's at 1, so even if you can play this card, you probably won't enjoy it that often. Okay, let's talk about some cards that are good going second. We mainly have Lava Golem and Kaijus because of how the counter trap works. If you use regular going second cards like Dark Hole, they can just negate it or just make their monster immune with Felgrand. But by having a Kaiju, it doesn't even give them the chance to negate or make them unaffected. And even if they are unaffected, you can just always attribute them with your Kaijus anyway, because that bypasses those kind of protection. So it is by far the best way to get rid of a turn 1 Tachyon board if you can afford to play some Kaijus, or if you don't have your normal summon. If you don't need your normal summon, you can always just play Lava Golem, which is probably the best going second counter against this deck. Okay, now let's actually look at some decks or archetypes that actually have a good matchup against Tachyon. But before that, I want to talk about choke points of this deck, because there are basically no choke points if you face against a good Tachyon player. Usually, if a deck is meta, you will want to explore what their choke points are, so you know when to activate your disruptions, like Book of Moon. So you know what monster to wait until you activate your disruptions. But that doesn't apply to this deck. There are no choke points in this deck if they play well, obviously. If they play badly, then you can always activate them in obvious choke points like your normal summon. But if they play well, you basically have no way of stopping it. So the best bet you have is to basically use your disruptions, use your Book of Moons whenever they have a monster on field. Just don't let them have 2 level 8s on field, basically, is the goal. But yeah, let's have a look at the decks or archetypes that actually have a good matchup against Tachyon. First of all, obviously, Tachyon is a good matchup against Tachyon. If you face against, within a Tachyon mirror match, the one determining factor of who wins is actually the skill. Not the skill you activate, it's like player skill. Because a good Tachyon player can win against a bad Tachyon player even when they're going first or second. They can always find a way to basically play around what your opponent has, and also make the appropriate Xyz monsters to counteract what your opponent has on field, because there are quite a bit of options that you can make when you face against Tachyon. You can make the regular Tachyon, you can make the Chaos Tachyon, you can climb into the Photon engine to make the rank 8s and rank 9s, you can make Dengirsu. There are a lot of options, and you picking the best one is key to actually winning the mirror match. So get familiar with this matchup, know when to use which cards, and you will basically win every single Tachyon mirror match. Or if you break, then I guess you just lose, but yeah, that applies to any deck. But to be fair, it's pretty hard for Tachyons to break. So yeah, That's it for Tachyon. Another really good deck on its own that has a good Tachyon matchup is Shiranui. So not just regular Shiranui. Regular Shiranui is strong, obviously, but the version that specifically beats Tachyon is a version that plays Beatrice. Because if you don't know, Shiranui can actually make Beatrice. You can actually use 2 level 6 synchros and make the Beatrice if you know you're facing against Tachyon. You can just make Beatrice going first and then send Gnome to the graveyard, the card that I mentioned back then, that reduces all monsters in the hand by 1. That trap card can be accessible with Beatrice, and Shiranui can make Beatrice. So basically any meta deck that could make Beatrice has a really good matchup against Tachyon if they go first. But obviously if they go second, they will still have to play through Tachyon's really strong turn on board, but yeah, that's a completely different thing. But at least if you win the coin flip, you just basically win automatically. And the same goes for Destiny Heroes. Destiny Heroes is another deck that could actually really consistently make Beatrice using only a single card, because any normal summonable Destiny Hero is able to make it dangerous, the card on screen, and then you can banish a Mally from the graveyard to summon another Mally from deck, and that's 2 level 6s, and you can make Beatrice from that, and then you can use it to send Mischief of the Gnomes to reduce your opponent's monsters' levels during their turn. The third deck that actually makes a Beatrice is Constellars. You might not actually know that Constellars can make Beatrice, same with Shiranuis or even Destiny Heroes. So a lot of people overlook the fact that you can actually make any generic rank 4 to rank 6 monsters using Constellars, even if they even if your materials don't have the same level, because of this card. Constellar Twinkle modifies your monster's levels by 1 or 2, and you can also get this card back to your hand by banishing Constellar from a graveyard. So you can basically use this card twice in a single turn. And that makes the 2 level 4s on your field both level 6, and then you can use them to make Beatrice and then send the trap from a deck to your graveyard to stop your opponent. So just by playing this card plus the Gnome trap, you will basically have a basically guaranteed win against Tachyon if you go first. But again, if you go second, it's a tough it's a tough time with a lot of other decks as well. Live Twins also are pretty good if they go first. So like you could basically tell the pattern, because Tachyon is just such a good deck. It's tier 0 for a reason. All of these decks, even if they have a counter, they pretty much can only play if they go first. So yeah, it's gonna be a tough time in the KC Cup. Anyway, what Live Twins have that other decks don't is that their monsters have a really low attack. So your opponent can't just special summon the Limit Dragon over and over again, because Limit Dragon requires your opponent to have a 2,000 attack or higher monster on the side of the field, which a lot of Twins don't, so that prevents them from accessing one of the most broken extenders that they ever have access to. And also the amount of back row that Live Twins just have can basically stop anything that Tachyon is trying to do. So as long as you open with enough interaction, you can stop a turn 2 Tachyon player. Okay, for some of the non-meta decks, Evil Swarm is by far the best one, because Evil Swarm Ophion just wins you the game on its own. While this one is on the field, your opponent basically cannot do anything. They cannot special summon any of their high-level monsters, because that's entirely locked by Ophion's effect. Every single monster that they have cannot be special summoned, and they basically cannot play at all. And even if they have something like a Book of Moon that maybe will counter it, you can still use the effect of Ophion to grab the quick play spell, the Evil Swarm quick play spell, to make your monster unaffected by spell trap effects. So not even stuff like Forbidden Chalice, Forbidden Droplet, or Book of Moon will be able to stop this card. But again, it's only good going first. Along with a lot of other decks in this list are also pretty much only good going first, which is why the deck was tier 0 in the first place. It's just a really annoying deck in general. But yeah, I hope this video gave you a bit of information on how to prepare the KC Cup with numerous amounts of Tachyons that will probably be lurking around. So at least you will have a chance of winning against those good Tachyon players who can seemingly play through every single disruption that you can put up. So yeah, that's it for the video, and good luck. I just want to see this get gone. I don't want to see this deck ever again.